they're doing, for the most part, what they have been told by government officials, by dietitians, by their own physicians on how they should eat. You have to have so many carbohydrates. Or, hey, you want to have a snack and have some cake, have a little extra insulin. Um, and I think that it's as much a matter of physicians and healthcare providers realizing that, first off, our ancestors in the profession probably got it wrong. But if you look far enough back, especially if you're looking at some of the earlier writings, like from Nina Teicholz and those folks, we had it right.
Hello, everyone. Adam with Carnivore Today. And today we have a very special guest, Dr. Don Phillips. So, Dr. Don, I really appreciate you joining me here today and sharing your carnivore journey. So, can you kind of tell us a little bit about yourself for those that don't know you?
I was born and raised in a small farming town north of Dallas. Actually, you've had a previous guest that is a cousin of mine, Amy Hosp. So we've known each other all our lives. I ended up going to undergraduate at Texas Christian University and then on to medical school at the University of North Texas in Fort Worth, and became a DO. From there, I ended up doing my residency in Columbus, Ohio, in emergency medicine, and finished that program in 1995, and then was working in emergency departments initially in the Air Force at Scott Air Force Base outside of St. Louis, and then I've ventured around the country since then. I've worked in Missouri and Texas, Oklahoma, um, back up in Ohio. So been all around. Um, I am an emergency physician by training, and that is my only practice at this point. And it's been an interesting journey. I'll put it that way.
That's awesome. It's interesting that we sort of have a connection with Columbus, Ohio. So, that's literally, 45, 50 minutes down the street for me. And
Oh, okay.
yeah, that's interesting. So, can you kind of elaborate a little bit of what's the difference between an emergency physician versus a standard physician?
Well, so an emergency physician works primarily in emergency departments, emergency rooms. Um, some of us end up branching out into other areas. I was a paramedic before I went to medical school, and so I also do practice as an emergency medical services physician as well, and am a medical director for an EMS academy. Standard physicians generally have offices and people make appointments and they come and see them. For us, we take care of acute problems on an as needed basis. Um, it may be somebody that comes in that they're concerned about their child having a fever in the middle of the night, or it may be somebody that's injured in a car accident or shooting or any number of different things. So we get a very general background training. I like to liken it to, if you've ever been to an Olympic swimming pool where they have a diving well. If you ever see somebody stand up in an Olympic swimming pool, the water only comes up, to their waist or their armpits, so it's very impressive to look at from the stands. It's very broad and very long.
Hmm.
But then when you think about specialists, they are very intelligent in a smaller area, and they confine that area to that one specialty or that one body system, as Dr. McCary likes to refer to it. Um, and so it's more like an Olympic diving well. It's a small pool when you look at it from the stands, but if you look at it from below, it's very deep. So the other popular way to describe what we do is that we know a little bit about a lot, but not a lot about anything.
Nice. You're still probably light years ahead of me in terms of intelligence, especially in health. So awesome.
Well,
So go ahead. Go ahead.
everyone has their strengths and their weaknesses. I like to describe to my patients that I'm not there to tell them how to live their life or what they have to do. I'm there to help them make informed decisions. And especially dietary sort of stuff, it seems, we are permitted to make bad decisions. Uh, it may not make sense to everyone, but we are permitted that right.
Absolutely. So I kind of want to dive into the carnivore diet with you a little bit and
Yes.
find out, how did you find out about it? I mean, to me, anyways, it seems like this would go against any training that you would have had, the carnivore diet. So I'm really interested on how you found it and how you sort of made the decision to jump into that lifestyle.
So in 2019, I was actually practicing not too far down the road from where you were alluding to in Lancaster, Ohio. And during the summer, I got a text message from another emergency physician that he and I have worked together since 2004 off and on. And he was mentioning another emergency physician that I'd worked with as well. And the specifics were, have you seen Scott lately? And I said, no, I've messaged him a few times, but I haven't. And he said, no, have you seen him? And then he proceeds to send me a book cover. And Dr. Scott Semino is an emergency physician by training as well. Very intelligent man, very, very nice man. He has a wonderful family. He actually lives not too far from where I live, just outside of Fort Worth. And the I had to sit there and look at the book cover for about 5 minutes to see that the before and after pictures were the same person because there was such a transformation. Now, Dr. Semino and his book is available on Amazon, and I don't think that he's really actively promoting it since 2019, but um, he is a type 1 diabetic since he was 9 years old. When I first met him, he was a larger gentleman as well. And so when I saw that, I was like, what in the world? And when I got to talking with the other physician, he said, yeah, I keep seeing these lab techs and x-ray techs and nurses at the ERs that I work at. If I haven't been there for a few months, and I'm like, are you okay? And they're like, oh, I'm doing Dr. Semino's diet. And turns out that Dr. Semino had done his own research and used himself as a guinea pig and found out that even for a type 1 diabetic who is making no insulin at all, a keto diet is very beneficial. And specifically, he was doing keto with intermittent fasting, and I believe that he is still doing that today. And of course, I got one of the copies of his book and dove into it and read some very interesting anecdotes from his early life and training that kind of led to where he was at that point in his life. And at the time, I was around 250 pounds. And I knew that I had to get healthier because I was also 55 years old and I had to do something to get myself in better condition. And so I decided to give it a try. And that was my initial introduction into ketogenic type eating. Um, Fast forward a little bit to 2019, November of 2019, and I am working a temporary assignment in Texarkana, Texas. And okay, I'll admit my pride got in the way. I was going to one of the local grocery stores to get my own food because I would always prefer to prepare my own food rather than rely on somebody else where I don't know exactly what's in it.
Mm-hmm.
And in the produce section, I was looking at something. I'm going, I don't recall if I can eat this or not. And I'm too proud to pull out my phone and look up and see if it was truly ketogenic. And so I said, yeah, I've been reading off and on about this thing called carnivore. And so I think I'll give that a try. And so I haven't looked back since then. I mean, who can argue with steak and eggs, bacon, all the wonderful things that we are allowed on this particular way of eating. I also figured out and had talked to another friend of mine who is a retired cliff diver, high diver, still teaches high diving. Um, and she and her husband that live out in San Diego. And when I mentioned this to them, they were both like, that's not going to last. You're just going to end up putting the weight back on. And my comment to them at the time was, whatever I decide to do as far as how I eat, that cannot be a temporary diet. That has to become a way of life. And they both agreed. And so, like I said, from that point, I really have not looked back.
That's great. So I'd like to really talk about, you say you were keto before and then you went carnivore. Did you notice any difference between the two lifestyles and the two ways of eating, or maybe one is better than the other, or?
Well, first off, I'll 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 kind of preface all of this by saying that there I agree with Casey Means, and as I recently read Good Energy.
Hmm.
I don't think that there is any one way of doing healthy way of eating. And this also goes back to Dr. Philip Ovadia. And, you know, there are multiple ways that we can eat whole food eating and get ourselves healthy. And so for me, the easiest, or I should say, the best part of doing carnivore is it is simple. It keeps it simple. And I'm an emergency physician. I don't like, digging deep into learning all these nuances. I need to have something that is simple, that I understand, and then I can move on to the next thing in my life. And so for me, carnivore has been the simplest way to eat. I mean, Dr. Berry puts it best: beef, bacon, butter, and eggs. And the beef can be any meat. I mean, how can you make it simpler than that? So that definitely appeals to me. Um, as far as how I feel, or the effectiveness, I think that for me, carnivore has probably been the best because I do believe that I feel a little bit better than I did on keto. And I believe that I have probably a little more energy. And so, once again, it's whatever each person decides is personally best for them. I don't want to be very staunch and you have to do it this way. It's keto or it's not, or carnivore or it's nothing, or keto or it's nothing.
Right.
Um, I believe that everyone again has free choice to make those decisions for themselves. I tell people we all make bad decisions every day. Some people drink, some people smoke, some people use drugs. And, I'm not here to enforce morality or my decisions on anybody else. But my job as a physician, not just an emergency physician, is to give you the information so that you can make an informed decision about how you want to live your life.
I love that. Yeah, I guess I should have prefaced that with, what it was for you. Yeah, I suspected that you would be sort of non-biased and let the
Well,
patient make their own decision for sure.
right. And once again, for me, it boiled down to what is the simplest thing for me to do. And for me, that has been doing carnivore.
So you could probably shed some light on emergency workers, people that are in the specific situation that you are in. If they wanted to eat a carnivore diet, I'm sure there's special challenges with that, with the way that you work. Can you give us a little bit of insight into how you actually make that work?
Well, and as we had talked about previously, Adam, I work strictly nights. I don't like dealing with administration. Um, but especially on night shifts, and especially if you're in a smaller community, it can be very difficult to have the proper things that you need to eat, those sort of things. For me, I kind of have tailored this myself to more of a one meal a day sort of thing. So I tend to eat before I go to work. But of course, there's holidays, there's, the special day that ends in Y that seems to come around all the time where, somebody brings in, snacks and those sort of things. And they're always sugary, carbohydrate loaded things. And that makes it a little bit difficult. I have to admit, when it was Christmas and I was working Christmas Eve and Christmas Day overnights, somebody brought in and handed me a small bag of a treat that they had made at home. Okay, I'm going to allow for things like that here and there, but it can't be an everyday sort of thing. It can't be every time that you eat. And I think that goes back to our ancestry. When we were evolving, we were not eating every day. And certainly, I, I'm not sure who said it that, if you're out on the plains of Africa with the Maasai tribe and they happen to find a honey bee hive, that you're not going to send the lowest ranking member over to go and get some of the honey.
Right.
Everyone deserves a treat now and then, and but it needs to be. And to quote Penn Jillette, who of course he's more on the vegetarian side, R and A. It's rare and it's appropriate. So you pick those sort of things, not necessarily the holiday season, but maybe one day during a holiday season. Or I've got two granddaughters that live with my wife and I, along with their mom and sister. When it's one of the grandkids' birthdays, you know what? I'll have a small slice of cake or something.
Hmm.
But for me, the challenge is when I am working, because my sleep wake cycles are different than everyone else. So restaurants don't tend to be open when I'm getting off of work necessarily, or if they are, they're serving pancakes. Still the safest thing in those situations is going to be eggs, bacon, those sort of food items. But it does tend to be a bit of a challenge for the night shift workers in particular. Part of it is also our diurnal rhythms. Since we're working nights all the time, it really throws things way off, just simply because the sleep wake cycles, the sunlight, and those sort of things are not really in our favor. And so, the few people that I've talked to that are also doing this, they also find struggles with, you know, oh my gosh, I just got off work and the sun is up and bright and everything, and then I'm trying to go to sleep, and so that we tend to want to have some of the things that we necessarily don't need when
Hmm.
we're trying to get ready for bed. And so, those are a few of the challenges. Another challenge is that believing in free choice, most of my family does not necessarily follow the same sort of thing. And so that makes it difficult when I'm at home, because the temptations are right there, just the same as they are at work.
Right. So, how do you work through those temptations, let's say early in the morning when you get off? I can't even imagine how, you have to be exhausted, tired, run down, you're ready to go to bed. And you got this whole thing going on with the sun rising and just sort of confusing situation. That's seemed like it would be a weak moment for everyone. So how do you kind of get through that?
Well, okay. My favorite snack is actually when I get to town for work, go to Sam's and buy a package of pre cooked bacon. It's 3 pounds of it before it was cooked.
Hmm.
It's easy to just grab some of that and have that for the snack. I like what Dr. Barry says. I refer a lot of people to his videos, especially about, different ways of eating carnivore. And I like that, he points out you don't have to have, as he puts it, the panda massaged beef. if all that you can afford is hot dogs and hamburgers, then have those things. Or I think he actually said bologna, but I think that's probably a little bit more filler than I want. But at the same time, I, I believe that, for me, just having those sort of things around as a snack, I don't really like to call it that, but, I staying primarily in hotels because of my travel for work.
Hmm.
It can be somewhat daunting because, most of them offer a free breakfast. Well, I don't know what's in that omelet that you have there. I don't know necessarily how it was cooked. So I have to kind of bypass those sort of things. Um, but I usually try to keep something in the room that I don't necessarily have to heat up, that I can have real quick just to get that hunger feeling out of the way so that I can go on to sleep. I know everyone says you're not supposed to eat right before you go to bed. It's a little bit different for those of us on night shift because our days and nights are so messed up.
I can imagine. So I've seen your before, and we everybody can see the after now. You look great, by the way.
Thank you.
So can you go into some of the benefits that you have noticed on a carnivore diet?
Well, obviously, some would call it a benefit. I don't necessarily call it that, but I've had to get new clothes, mostly because I'm a guy. I don't like shopping for clothes.
Right.
Um, but I have had to get new clothing. Then let's talk about the health benefits primarily. Um, Before I started doing this way of eating, it had been quite a while since I'd had cholesterol lab work done. And I do recall, though, that my triglycerides were around 150 to 190. And everyone always shook their finger at me. You got to do something about that HDL cholesterol because it was around 20. Well, April of last year, April of 2024, I had lab work that was done. And at that time, my triglycerides were down to 90 and my HDL cholesterol was 60. And total cholesterol actually stayed pretty steady. They still were like, you probably need a statin. No, no. Um, and so, it has come with some health benefits from that perspective. Um, the first time that I had a fasting insulin level done, it was 11. And then the most recent one was 6. So those
Oh,
are all benefits. So, I'm educating myself along the way. And so I hope that that is of some benefit to my patients. I'm always more than happy to, show them how I was before I started this and to share that story with them. Becomes difficult in an emergency department setting where, you know, you never know what's coming in and it seems like you're always busy. But it's one of those things that I like to be able to try to share with people. I think it makes the hospital administration a little bit upset when I tell them, listen, I'm not trying to make anybody skinny. I just want you to get healthy enough that you don't need to come and see me, other than if you get hurt. So those are a few of the challenges it seems at times, but that's also though how it's been a benefit to me as well.
that is awesome. So in terms of weight loss, how much have you actually lost in total?
Well, I actually went down as low as 164, and I started out. I think it was 249 was the actual number when I got started on this. So roughly 80 to 90 pounds. Um, I did have an incident, and we won't get into my beliefs on why it happened, but I ended up with some joint infections back in September. And so my family, of course, not being carnivore, they did try to help with that to some extent, but I also got advice from nurses and other folks. You have to have carbohydrates or you're not going to heal. I'm like, well, let me try first. And so I did actually creep up, and currently I'm at 180 the last time that I weighed. And I don't really care so much about the number as much as how I feel.
Hmm.
And when I do get lab work, how does the lab work look? Those are to me very objective things that can be measured. And I know weight is another one that can be measured, but I don't want to have a fixation necessarily on the scale.
Right. Yeah, I agree with you 100%. That seems to be what a lot of people fixate on is, the weight. They want to see these drastic numbers with weight loss and things like that, and they equate that with an incredible story, which it is. It is most definitely. Some have lost hundreds and hundreds of pounds, and it's absolutely
Right.
miraculous. And it definitely helps out, especially from a orthopedic standpoint.
Yes.
But like Dr. Kilt says, fat doesn't cause disease. I
No.
sort of believe that. Our bodies are made to produce fat, right? They get fatter and
Exactly.
get skinnier, and whether we're in feast or famine or whatever it is. So, yeah, that's amazing that you've seen those benefits. In terms of your labs, is there anything that is off kilter for you based on being on carnivore?
No, I really have not in all the years and having had labs multiple times. I can't say that I've found anything that is like, oh my gosh, I've got to do something about that. Now, I'll interject at this point my own kind of personal theory about how we eat, because everyone in the different communities talks about, well, look at the Asian peoples, look at the Indian peoples, those different races and ethnicities. They eat a lot of rice, or they eat a lot of vegetables, or they're strictly vegetarian. And I think that, my opinion, I believe that part of that plays a role from where your ancestors were evolving from, what was available to make them the fittest to survive. And so I believe that that definitely plays a part in how that person individually is able to metabolize their food and utilize it in the best way. I also, though, would point out, Jen, none of those ancestors that far back had any potato chips or bread. They had to make all of the stuff themselves. There was no Costco that they could go and buy in bulk. They were getting what they needed every day for that particular day. And some days, if they were not successful, they went without. And so um, that really kind of has been what has been at the core of my thought processes on this. Um, this particular way of eating, and of course, being a Texan, you know, beef is king here. So um, that that's what I enjoy. And I think that if it's prepared properly, if you're not having a bunch of additives, if it's raised responsibly, I think that that plays a big part in how we um, manage ourselves on our way of eating, is our family heritage. And that you may or may not ever be able to find out. And I don't know that we'll ever necessarily tease out whether or not that's true, but that's my own personal way of I guess you'd say, aligning that in my head, why some people are able to do some of those things and some are not. Um, so
Yeah, that's
I,
uh,
I don't
that's
know
that's
that that
great.
answered your question.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, I've interviewed a few others, and one of them we interviewed for the documentary Healing Humanity, and
Mhm.
he's American Indian heritage, and he
Sure.
he said that type 2 diabetes is absolutely rampant in that community, and genetically, I
Yes.
think they're predisposed to have that sort of an issue. And it's interesting the how close a race is or a people group is to the equator and how far they are away from it. They have these different sort of reactions to processed foods and high carb foods.
Well, and I think as history is kind of borne out, you speak about Native Americans. The Pima Indian group is probably the number one example where they hunted, fished, gathered on their territorial lands for forever until we forced them to have to rely on the government to feed them because of their water. We started damming up rivers and took their water, and so that ended up leaving them dependent on the government. And of course, the government came in with flour and sugar and those sort of things rather than what they were eating all along. And so, I think that for most of the different indigenous groups, and if you've watched the documentary The Magic Pill, you can see the same sort of thing that happened with the Aboriginal people, that when we said, we're going to make your life better, we're going to show you how to eat, the government, whoever, scientists, bringing our way of life to them brought them the same diseases and conditions that afflict us. And I think that the we owe them a great apology, but more than that, we also need to help to show them that your ancestral way of eating is probably the best for you.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree with that more. It's a tragic situation, and there's probably not a day that goes by that I don't think about that. These people that have just been led down the wrong path, and then they just don't know at this point. Um,
Exactly.
so one thing that I wanted to ask you in relation to your work as an emergency physician is, do you see any situations where people come in with acute issues or problems that are diet related?
Well, certainly food allergies are one thing, and those happen not very often. Most of the time, we don't see those. Um, as far as what I tend to deal with and what most emergency physicians deal with is more the consequences of those bad policies, bad decisions, those sort of things. We have a nation where our dollars to try to feed the hungry are able to be spent on the most unhealthy sort of things that anyone can truly imagine. And because of its price for everyone, not just for people that are on assistance, it tends to be something that afflicts that particular community. And it breaks my heart that those people have been taught through the education, through WIC and all of those, that these sort of foods are what we should be eating. And I think that we're having more and more research that's coming out that's showing that no, that probably is not the best way. And so I'm hopeful that maybe our dietary, we maybe have hit the tipping point to where now some of these things are going to start returning more towards our ancestral ways of eating, both for local communities as well as for ethnic groups. And so that would be my hope, but that tends to be what I see more and more. And I've seen just in the past 10 to 15 years an explosion in the number of diabetes cases, and it's almost 100% that it's type 2 diabetes. And of course, we also deal with a lot of patients that are residents of nursing homes and assisted living, where dementia, are now being referred to as type 3 diabetes, is a huge cost and burden, and just a nightmare for those families and those patients to have to live with. And so that's, for me, that's one of the big reasons why I want to take, just a few minutes at the end of the encounter or when it seems naturally appropriate to talk about those sort of things briefly with with the patients, with the caregivers, with the parents, and tell them, we need to look into this. You need to look into this, and you need to make an informed decision for your loved ones and for yourself so that you do get healthier and you don't need to come and see me all the time. If you want to come and see me and just say hi, please do. But, I don't want to see you laying in bed sick.
Yeah, I'm sort of getting a little anxious and upset when you're talking about how many people come in with type 2 diabetes and these other issues that are so preventable if people have the correct information, and just makes me want to try to, I don't know, do as much as we possibly can to get this word out, because it just seems like I don't feel like the organizations that are in place and the government is doing enough to get the education out. They you typically most times support the wrong methods. So yeah, it's just frustrating.
Well, and uh, if folks are looking for something to help inform themselves about, I guess you'd have to say, the mistakes that we as medicine have made through the years. I do like Dr. McCary's book, Blind Spot, and we all deal with cognitive dissonance over what we were trained versus what we're observing, versus guidelines. And, I have certain measures that I have to meet all the time, regardless of what it is. And it does make me upset, especially they're having traveled quite a bit now for the past 6 years, for my work. I have seen obviously different communities in different parts of the nation, and it really is disturbing when you go to one particular location, and I actually described it to a patient with type 2 diabetes just last night, that every time that I walked into that emergency department, I was going to see at least one person, if not more than one person during that shift, that I would admit to the hospital that was likely going to lose either a toe or a foot or an entire leg, sometimes their life, because of their lifestyle. And I don't want to blame them. They're the victim in all of this. They're doing, for the most part, what they have been told by government officials, by dietitians, by their own physicians on how they should eat. You have to have so many carbohydrates. Or, hey, you want to have a snack and have some cake, have a little extra insulin. Um, and I think that it's as much a matter of physicians and healthcare providers realizing that, first off, our ancestors in the profession probably got it wrong, but if you look far enough back, especially if you're looking at some of the earlier writings, like from Nina Teicholz and those folks, we had it right up until we started making our own discoveries. Almost like when Adam and Eve ate the apple and they finally realized good and bad. They started discovering the world and seeing it rather than being led by a knowledgeable creator that made it. And so I think that there is something to be said for, we as physicians and nurses and dietitians need to be willing to say, okay, this makes no sense based on my personal training, but I'm going to be willing to look at it from an objective standpoint. I'm not going to prejudge. I'm going to wait and see, you know, what really turns out. I'm going to listen to these folks that have taken the leap and have done, their own research. I'm going to be willing to look at those same things that conflict with how I was trained. That's really, I think, at the heart of what we as healthcare professionals need to encourage, is that we need to be willing to say, you know what? I may be wrong. And I tell folks I'm married, so I know that I'm wrong a lot. I have plenty of people that point that out to me and have over the years, and I'm going to make mistakes, and that's okay as long as I learn from my mistakes. The problem is if we keep doing the same thing that we've been doing for the past 100 years or so, we're only going to get more and more sick.
Absolutely. It's heartbreaking for sure. I was shocked that you mentioned that you see someone almost on a daily occurrence, at least one that has issues with having to potentially lose a limb, or, I mean, that's
Well,
heartbreaking.
that was in one particular community.
Okay.
That's not every day in every ER.
Okay.
And so I can tell you that, there's certain areas of the country where, I rarely see that. And, and I'm glad that those are the case. Now, general obesity, I see that everywhere. You know, for me, it was more a matter of how can I sit there and tell a patient, that you need to change the way that you're eating if I'm not doing that same thing myself. I have to be responsible enough to, as another speaker has put it over and over, be that N of one, that one patient in the study, because it's my own personal study of my life, and be willing to make some changes and to make some observations. And can I generalize that to everyone? Absolutely not. But I believe that everyone should be willing to very objectively look at, okay, what I've been doing up to this point in my life has not helped me. I'm sick. I've got all these medicines. I don't think that God designed us to be deficient in metformin. I don't think that, there's very many things where what we have come up with as a chemical fix really is necessarily the best way to address these sort of things. And I think that if we go back and look at ancestral ways of eating, the way those ways that we evolved to become the only creature on this planet that can build a car or can think about the fact that I exist, you know,
Hmm.
that has the brain power to do that. I think that we need to be willing to look back and say, how did our ancestors achieve these monumental things that now we think, that's nothing? And it really is truly phenomenal that we became what we are today.
I agree 100%. So I'm going to switch gears a little bit and ask you, based on your colleagues, right, physicians, practitioners, how many of them, or what percentage do you think actually sort of is conscious of, or maybe even practices a low carbohydrate, high fat type of lifestyle?
Well, I think that, my own rough estimate would be that probably less than 10% do. And once again, I look back at some of my own philosophy about where you are originally from can determine the best way for you to eat. And I believe that, we do have a significant number of healthcare providers, physicians, nurses, nurse practitioners, PAs, that they do believe in trying to eat healthy, and they're willing to listen to conflicting viewpoints. And so they may have said, I'm not eating refined foods, I'm not eating ultra processed foods. And so I think that there's such a range of these people that you'd probably say that probably closer to 40 or 50% are trying to do some things and are willing to listen to the evidence. Um, then they've also got ads on TVs. They have families that are not necessarily on board with that. They have their professional societies. Think about the American Dietetic Association, the American Diabetes Association. we get all these conflicting signals, and it tends to be that we're more comfortable in the crowd than we are outside of the crowd. And so when I first started on this journey myself, I didn't want to tell anybody. And after I've seen the health improvement that I've had in myself, forget anybody else around me. Okay. Just in myself, it was to the point where I was like, okay, I think I'm probably ready to start talking about some of this stuff. I actually spoke with Dr. Ovadia about that when I first started,
Hmm.
because I really expected that I was going to get patient complaints and people saying, oh, he called me fat. But surprisingly, what I'm hearing more and more, and I believe that if my colleagues will hear this as well, then they may be more willing to approach this. But what I heard more and more was, you're the first doctor that's ever talked to me about this. And I'm like, do you have any questions? And they're like, no, I'm just, why has nobody ever told me these things before? And I hear that uh, when I first started this every time that I would talk to these people. And maybe that's the location, because I am in a different location now. Now I hear that probably every 2 or 3 shifts that I work, why are you the only one that's ever talked to me about this? Or, you told me more in 10 minutes talking about ways of eating than anybody has ever talked to me about that in my entire life. And I think that that's really sad, that we have not taken that opportunity to advocate for our patients. And it really kind of hurts my heart, because I, just the nature of my practice, I'm probably not going to see them again ever.
Hmm.
And so I'm hoping, that I throw a rock in their pond and, create a little ripple that will help to reach out. But that's, to me, that's the saddest thing. Is I think that there are a lot of doctors that would be willing to talk about these things, but there is such pressure, and there was fear on my part. I really was afraid that I was going to start getting the complaints and I'd end up losing that particular position. So, I got to feed the family as well as feeding myself.
Hmm.
And so, but at some point you do have to have some principles in your life. And I can't tell how anybody else feels on the inside, but I can tell those people how I feel.
Yeah, that's a tricky situation for you, and I feel for you for sure. And I feel like it's more important than ever to have physicians and medical doctors in positions like you are, that are in the trenches, right? That's within the system, that is able to at least share a little bit. I did a video on my channel not too long ago where I interviewed a lot of the top carnivore doctors, if you will, to
Mhm.
in an effort to try to help practitioners and physicians, how can they educate themselves a little bit more about this if they are motivated to share this with their patients, right? And maybe some continuing education in this space, and how can
Yes.
they actually share this with with patients in a way that's not going to get them in trouble. So I'll link that video here as well.
Yes.
But yeah, you're right. All of those doctors that I've talked to, they all had experiences with other physicians that have lost their income essentially because of speaking out about this. So it's really scary.
Well, and several of the physicians that I know that have done similar sort of thing, whether it's keto, carnivore, um, Atkins, whatever, if they have had a dramatic change in their own life, it's really kind of hard to keep them quiet about
Yes.
it. And I really wish that there was more of a public outcry for patients to say, yeah, I don't care what any particular organization says that that doctor should be doing, if they have something that's of good information that has worked with them, that has worked for their patients, then why are you keeping me from hearing that? And I'm hopeful that maybe we're on the cusp of some changes coming about. Um, and so I guess it will have to wait and see what really turns out with those things. But I to me, this feels like a groundswell of providers of all different stripes, physicians, some dietitians, nurse practitioners, PAs, that are saying, you know, can't keep doing the same thing over and over. That's insanity. I can't keep telling them that they have to eat, this amount of carbohydrates when I see with my own eyes that this is not helping anyone other than the manufacturers of those foods. I can't keep telling them, oh, this, type of food is great for you when I know that it's not. And when they live that themselves, when they have been through some of the struggles and they realize, hey, this is actually a lot easier and I feel a lot better, I think that that tends to make it so that you can't keep them quiet.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. So, is there any particular method or sort of a pathway that you would lead a patient down? Like, hey, just check out this video or whatever, or something like that?
Well, especially since most of the ones that I'm seeing, I'm dealing with the sequelae of their illness that has, brought them to that point, and they've come to a point where they have to seek care right then.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, one of the best things has been to say, okay, it's hard right at the start. It is. I realize that. Let me recommend that you watch The Magic Pill on Amazon Prime to see the results, and not just the results in one or two people, but in entire families, and some of them multi generational. Let me show you what it does to the children, especially the two autistic children that are in the magic pill. Every time I see those scenes, it makes me tear up, mostly because I realize that we did that to them in
Mm-hmm.
some of those cases. Um, I tend to refer them to Dr. Barry's YouTube channel. I tell them that from the perspective of balanced ways of eating, that having Dr. Ovadia's book will be very non judgmental and will say, okay, here are the pros and the cons of each of these. And you have to make your decision based on those things. What are you willing to accept and willing to do versus not willing to accept or do? Um, I plan on, now that I just recently finished Good Energy by Casey Means,
Mm-hmm.
saying, okay, this is an excellent way of you understanding on a cellular basis why some of this stuff happens the way it happens. But then here are some recommendations at the back. You don't have to agree with any or all of them. I certainly don't necessarily believe that all of her recommendations are the best way for me, and that's okay. I want people to at the end of the day make their own judgment. I want them to say, I did this myself. I made these decisions. I made this choice. It wasn't some doctor that told me that's what you have to do. I want it to be that they understand why these things work. And it doesn't have to be extremely complicated. It really doesn't. And that's why I tell them my job is to help you to understand so that you can make an informed decision.
I love
And
that.
and we really need to get to the point where people will start to think before they eat something, oh, this, I love this, but it's probably not the best thing for me to eat. So, maybe I need to put this back down. Um, and so, making those choices ahead of time and not putting yourself into places where, the only thing to eat is, the bread and pasta and those sort of things. Maybe Olive Garden isn't the best place for us to go for dinner. Um, I'm not picking on Olive Garden. I do go there with my family, but I'm careful about what I choose to eat there. Maybe, you know, having a patient print up an article. I very commonly refer people to the um, state of the art review that was published in the Journal of the American College of Cardiology. It's new information. It's only been out there now for 5 years almost. It was from August of 2020. I tell them, I want you to look this up. I don't want you to trust me. I want you to look up JACC, Journal of the American College of Cardiology, August of 2020, Saturated Fats. The title will have in it State of the Art Review. Look at it. It's not that difficult. It's a totally free article. And maybe print up the paper, or take the journal citation, take that to your doctor, your healthcare provider, when they're saying, oh, you need to eat healthier, you need to eat, have more seed oils, you got to cut the saturated fat. Do you want to read what these people say? And I'll come back and we'll talk. And we should demand that from our providers. We should demand that they be willing to listen to another viewpoint and to read the state of the art, and to say, okay, I'm doing these things, you may not necessarily agree with them, but just the same as you still have patients that smoke and you're a cardiologist, you know I'm gonna have the saturated fat because apparently others in your profession say that it's the best way.
That's great advice. I love that. So you mentioned quite a few books, and I'll make sure that I link those so that people have quick
Sure.
access to those. Are there any other books besides like Ovadia's book or Scott Semino's book that you would recommend? Doesn't have to be health related. Maybe it's just something that you enjoy yourself.
Well, as far as on our dietary stuff, I really like all of the books by Gary Taubes. I think that he has done an excellent job of fleshing out the history of how we wound up where we are and presenting that evidence to us. And Nina Teicholz, she became so motivated that she went on to get a doctorate, not as a physician, and that's great. We need doctorate level stuff to help motivate people everywhere. Um, I like the Magic Pill for a documentary to show people real families doing this. As far as some of the other books, um, some of them are pro- they're very scientific, but they also have a lot of great information. The Great Plant-Based Con by Jane Buxton, I think, is excellent. Um, you know, to me, that's an English version on a subject very similar to Gary Taubes' Good Calories, Bad Calories. I mean, the book is 700 pages long
Wow.
and is very detailed. And so I'll tell some patients, if you like that level of detail, if you like that scientific background, then Good Calories, Bad Calories is for you. But if you don't really want that and you want something that's easier to digest, then I would say that what you probably should be reading instead is his book that's a stripped down version of that, called Why We Get Fat. I don't like the title. I think that it should have been titled something else, but it's not my call.
Hmm.
But that's about half the size of Good Calories, Bad Calories, and has a lot of practical advice. And so Gary Taubes has stood the test of time over and over again. I think that uh, Robert Lufkin is great.
Hmm.
Dr. Robert Lustig. I love both of their stuff. I keep getting them mixed up from time to time because their names sound so much alike.
Yes.
Um, but I think Dr. Lufkin, with Lies I Taught in Medical School is an excellent book. I think that it's simple for lay people to read. You don't have to have a big scientific background in order to understand. And we need more physicians, nurses, healthcare providers that can actually break this stuff down so that patients can understand why we recommend what we recommend. And that empowers them to truly make that informed decision rather than just being, well, it's because I'm the doctor. I never want to say that to patients. Never want to say that. I want, if at all possible, obviously, if you can't speak for yourself, we have to make those decisions. But I always want the patients to be able to make that decision on their own, or their family members to make those decisions on their own, but to have an understanding of why I may recommend something, and they're free to refuse it. And so, I think that these folks that have written extensively on this that we have talked about, they do a much better job of breaking this stuff down to a level where most people can understand it if they want to understand it than I will ever be able to do.
I love that. Those are great recommendations, and I'll make sure that all of those are linked in the description for everybody for sure. And I can't end this chat that we're having without mentioning the Nutrition Network. I don't know if you're familiar with them, with Professor Tim Noakes, but
Mm-hmm.
I recently was accredited with Nutrition Network Advisor, which is the first step in their coaching program. So they actually have two different pathways: a coach pathway and a medical practitioner pathway. At some point, they meet together, and then you end up getting a Nutrition Network practitioner accreditation. And so far, what I've been learning is absolutely phenomenal. So if there's any medical professionals that's watching this that want to get some additional learning in this area, I can't recommend that enough. Some of the other friends in this space that I have, like Dr. Nelson Vasquez, he's gone through that practitioner program and found a lot of value in it too. But it's essentially low carb, high fat, and all of the evidence around that. So they talk about all the latest studies and things like that. That's very important in the medical world. So
Excellent. I'll have to check that out. I had not heard of them. So,
they're based out of South Africa. So that's
right.
probably why us in the States haven't heard of them as much. But by a long shot, all of the carnivore doctors that I've talked to in the past, they all recommend um, the Nutrition Network and
Hmm.
the Society of Metabolic Health Practitioners.
Yeah, I do know about them. And I actually refer patients to their website to try to find a metabolic health practitioner.
Excellent. Excellent. Awesome. Well, it's been an absolute pleasure speaking with you, Don, today and getting to learn more about you and what makes you tick. So, is there anywhere where people could find you, or if they wanted to connect with you, how can they do that?
Well, I don't have YouTube channels or anything like that. I am on some of the Facebook carnivore groups. I'm more of a lurker than anything else, but I will speak up from time to time. Um, Other than that, trying to don't go and get hurt so that you have to come and see me. And certainly don't do unhealthy things so that you have to come and see me. I would be happy to give you an email address, and if people would like to send me an email or something, I'm more than happy to try to help out. Of course, we have to give it with the caveat that this is not medical advice, because we're not establishing a physician patient relationship. But I would rather point people to resources so that they can do some of the investigation on their own. I tend to get more responses in the ER when I talk about this of, what? Are you serious? You mean diabetes is not a metformin deficiency? No, it's not.
I love it.
So yeah, I'll give you an email address that you can put in there.
Okay. Awesome. And just so everyone knows, I won't publicly put the email address in the description. If you want to, you can go on my channel and you fill out the little form, and that'll give you my email, and then you can contact me that way, and then I can reach out to you that way. So, is there anything
Absolutely.
that I want to give you an opportunity to maybe talk about something that we didn't cover if you wanted to?
Yeah, I think that we've actually pretty well covered everything that I had in mind. I didn't really come on with any preconceived ideas of, want to talk about this or that. Um, Other than, I would encourage everyone to do what you can to make yourself as healthy as possible, because none of us want to be a burden for our families. We all want to be able to take care of our families the way that we see fit and the best that we can. And so I would encourage you to make changes that benefit you, because in the long run that's going to benefit everybody that you love and care about.
I love that. Well, thank you so much, Don, for joining me today. It's been an absolute pleasure. And
Absolutely.
we will definitely be chatting again. And I appreciate you. And I would like to say bye for now.
All right, sounds great. Thank you so much. It was a pleasure.